Introducing you to people across North Carolina and around the world who put their Catholic faith into action. This is FaithWorks on Catholic 540 AM Divine Mercy Radio. Now, here's your host for FaithWorks, Ellen White.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of FaithWorks on Divine Mercy Radio. Our show highlights individuals through God's grace who put their faith into action daily. People whose lives and work are making a real impact on our Catholic faith and in our communities. On FaithWorks, we share their stories. I'm your host, Ellen White. Today's conversation is one that speaks directly to a need we see all around us, the call for strong, faithful, and spiritually grounded men. I'm joined today by Sean Corcoran of Men for Life, an organization dedicated to forming men in faith, brotherhood, and purpose, helping them live out their vocation with strength and integrity. This is part one of our two-part interview with Sean Corcoran of Men for Life as we begin a powerful conversation about his background, pro-life ministry, and the mission of Men for Life. Sean, welcome to FaithWorks. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Ellen. It's great to be here.
Oh, gosh. So you have graciously agreed to do a two-part interview. You know, in my research of you and the work that you're doing with Men for Life, and of course, your story prior to coming to Men for Life is an incredible story. So what I'd like to do is just spend the first half or part one of this interview talking about your background, and end with a little bit about Men for Life. And then next week's show, we'll talk about Men for Life, and go into the work that you're doing with them and what it's about, and a little bit of their history and mission, and what your plans are for the future, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. That sounds great.
Okay, so let's start. For those who may not know you yet, who is Sean Corcoran beyond the title, and what has your personal journey looked like?
Yeah, thank you. So I am an attorney. I live in Louisiana. I am married to Dr. Michelle Corcoran. She is a dentist, and we have 5 children. We have 2 biological children. We have 3 adopted. They are 11, 10, 7, 7, and 6. The 7-year-old, they're not twins. They are 10 days apart. So they're twins in the sense that I always use this, and sometimes I date myself when I do it, but like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito. I don't know if you remember that movie, Twins.
I do. Tell me again about that.
80s or early 90s. So I don't know. It was like a science project, embryology science project, for lack of a better term, where they wanted to create the perfect human. And Arnold Schwarzenegger was the product of that, and Danny DeVito was the byproduct of that. And throughout the movie, they find out that they are biologically twin brothers, and they go through this. It's a comedy, obviously, obviously. And so you know, I have one of my 7-year-olds is very large and very strong, and the other is tiny and very fast, and they are, but they're 10 days apart. So it's really funny they're so close, and so they just love each other so much, you know, just real twin brothers would, right?
Yes.
It's really cool.
Yeah. And I want to get into the adoption process with you and your wife, Michelle, in a bit. But before we get to that, take us back to your childhood and what family life was like growing up. Any siblings?
Yes, I'm the oldest. I have a younger brother who's a couple years younger than me, and a sister who's 8 years younger than me. Okay. And we moved a lot growing up. I think that frames part of my life is, you know, my parents are both from Rochester, New York. They met when my dad was 16 and my mom was 14 at a Catholic school dance. And they've been together pretty much ever since. And my dad went off to college, played football at Florida State. So I was born in Tallahassee, you know, and he worked for chemical plants. So when I was 6, we moved to St. Louis, Missouri. Then when I was 8, we moved to Mobile, Alabama. And when I was 10, we moved to Rochester, New York. And when I was 12, we moved here to Louisiana. And, you know, really never intended to stay here. We ended up staying here only because the last move was so hard on me at that age, leaving friends every 2 years, that my parents decided to put a halt to the moving. But, we were raised in what I would consider a traditional Catholic family. We went to church every Sunday, even on vacations. We went to Catholic school. That was a big priority for my parents. My mom stayed home until my sister. My mom went back to college whenever my sister was old enough to drive and was in high school, and then she became a teacher after that.
That's great.
So it was just very traditional Catholic upbringing, I would say. And part of that, and I think this really gets into the story, but part of that traditional Catholic upbringing was that we didn't have a lot of hard conversations. We didn't talk about a lot of the things that you just don't talk about, right? Like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, to just use the standard terminology. No real conversations about that. My dad worked, he provided, he coached us. He's a very good dad, but that was his role, was a provider and coach. My mom was the caretaker.
It's interesting that you bring that up, Sean, because I think for the longest time, I thought it was only unique to a certain number of families that they weren't discussing this. And especially if you were Catholic school educated, the parents just had this expectation that everything was going to be taken care of by the school. And there seemed to be a real shift, I think, early 60s. I was born in 68. So, in 70s, we lived in California. So I think by and large, that was a general experience that parents in Catholic families had, that they just thought, it'll work out. The kids will figure out, the stuff that they need to learn about. So basically to say that you're not alone in your experience.
Sure my
with
parents
this.
never had those conversations with their parents, which is,
right.
So how would they have ever thought to have those conversations?
Right.
And so my story is what framed how I view that, and the reason that we talk about so many things with our kids.
Okay, so what are some early memories that stand out to you when you think about faith growing up, Sean?
I think that it was just, that's a great question that I've never really thought of. I think a big thing is that there were two things that were consistent in all of those moves, right? And that is my dad's parents, where they lived. Whenever we would travel, it was always to the same place. And so that has a significant memory for me, because when we moved so much, it was like, even though that wasn't my home, it was the one place that never moved. And then the same thing for the church. It was the one thing that, regardless of where we moved, that was kind of a home base, was the church. And then I don't know if I said this, but we went to Catholic school growing up. And so the church and the school, and so our faith was always, the one point of stability, I would say, throughout a lot of instability.
We share that also. I was raised in a military family, and we moved every 3 to 4 years or so. And I had an aunt that was in Georgia, and same, my aunt and my uncle and their children stayed in the same house until they were not able to care for themselves anymore. So, and that was a place that we would visit quite frequently in the summertime. And I was just thinking about this the other day, actually, the same thing, but in great analogy with the church, that it is a lighthouse. It remained consistent for you. So I think that's a great answer, Sean.
Yeah.
Now, what about strong male role models, especially with your dad working, I guess, with him coaching? Would you say your dad, or would you say other male role models that you had as a child or a teenager?
No, I would definitely say my dad. Okay. I think that when it comes to what does it mean to be a man, I can look at, how he did based on what he had available to him at the time, right? And see that he did everything the best that he could. But more importantly than that is that there was unconditional love, right? Like 100% unconditional love. Not to say that that there wasn't turmoil. I was not an easy child to raise, especially as I got into teenage years and beyond. But the unconditional part comes because even through all of that, he was the one person I always knew that I could count on if something happened and I didn't know where to go, regardless of where we were in our personal relationship at any time, that he was the one person I would call who would be there.
That's such a great,
and so I think that is regardless, my dad wasn't a perfect dad, and look, and I wake up every day and my goal every day is to be perfect dad and a perfect husband. And I fail every day and I will, like, it's not attainable, but I hope that I will always be able to provide the same level of unconditional love to my children, that he provided to me.
Well, okay. So, growing up, different places, traveling a lot, ending up in Louisiana, and I can't remember. Oh, you were 12 when you were there. So,
That's right.
And then as you became a young man, did you ever wrestle with questions of identity, purpose, or belonging, or what were you like as a young teenager? Okay.
No, I think that was really the tipping point that kept my family from moving was the lack of feeling of belonging. By the time we moved to Louisiana, I don't know how many people you talked to from Southwest Louisiana, but I would suggest that I do not have a Southwest Louisiana accent.
I think you're right.
And so by the time we moved here, I was so tired of moving all the time that I just refused, to develop an accent because I didn't think I would stay here. And every time I moved, that was like a point of, I don't even want to call it bullying. I think that's probably too strong of a word for little kids, but just a point of difference between me and the other kids where I was moving to was how I sounded. And so I just kind of consigned myself that I am going to have as neutral of an accent as I possibly can. And that I wasn't going to make any friends. By the time we moved here, I wasn't going to make friends because what a waste of time. I would make friends, and by the time we had good friends, we would move. And so, the result of that, of course, was a lack of a sense of belonging and, a feeling of isolation. And so, which caused other problems. And I can look back now and recognize that, that I played a huge part in that. But at the time, I felt like a victim, for the lack of a better word, like it wasn't me that was the reason I didn't have friends. It was that people just didn't want to be my friends. And look, I'm great friends with those same people now who had no idea about any of that. Right. Like, as far as they know, we were friends. So it was really an internal struggle with, like you put it perfectly, a sense of belonging, because just moving all the time and not having any stability and not believing we were going to be here, I didn't really have a place, is how I felt.
Do you think, looking back, even though you had these internal struggles, Sean, your parents could have done something differently? Or did they do all they could?
I think if they had known, they could have done something differently. I think once they recognized it, they understood, and that's why they didn't move, because they didn't want for my younger brother and sister to experience the same thing. I don't think they knew how to help me out at that point. I think that's the worst possible time, right? 12, 13, 14, because there's so many things going on hormonally in children's lives that that even without moving, that's like the hardest time. And so I don't know that they could have done anything differently. They will tell you that they could have. Like, we've had that conversation.
Yes.
And they think that, they think about it more than I do. Like, I have a great life now, so I have no regrets about anything, but they have expressed to me that they wish they had done things differently or done more.
Yeah, you wouldn't be where you are today, though, had you not had those
That's
experiences.
Right. So 100%.
Yeah. Okay. And I want you to take me, Sean, from teen years to getting to your first college experience.
Yeah. So I, because of how I avoided friends, because I avoided, making those relationships, and kind of put myself, by the time I recognized that we weren't going anywhere, and I put myself in I kind of put myself in a position to where I didn't have friends. And so I didn't want to be here anymore. And so all I wanted after I got out of high school was to move. And so that's what I did. I graduated from high school in May and started college out of state in June. I think just a couple weeks before we moved. And so, I played sports and stuff, but I never, again, felt like that was the right place. I quit playing football my junior year because a teacher had mentioned that the debate team got to leave school more. And so I quit football and joined the debate team, and, just kind of bounced from thing to thing. So never really found a point of stability at all. And so, I think that kind of really encapsulates that portion of my childhood.
Yeah. So, okay. So you were at college, not really developing any friendships. And how were you doing in classes? And did you know?
No, so by the time I got to college, it was a new experience.
Okay.
And so I embraced that.
Okay.
And I made friends, and college was great, right? Because I was finally away from here.
Yes.
Which I thought was the problem.
Right.
And so, I started dating someone pretty quick after I got there, and was fairly social and very ambitious. I was taking 400 level political science classes my freshman year.
Wow.
I didn't do well in them, but that was like my thought at the time was that I wanted to be the president. And so that was like my goal going into my freshman year of college. So it was.
Let me ask you. I'm curious. How did you do academically? Were your grades good, even in high school?
Our grades were good in high school. Yes.
That's amazing.
I didn't. It was that was always something that came easy to me. Mm-hmm. So that was never really an issue.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and in college and taking 400 level poli-sci classes, even though you weren't doing necessarily that great.
Yeah. It turns out in college, you actually have to work to do well.
Right.
Like you have to do a lot of reading to excel in 400 level political science classes.
Right.
I found out later that they should have caught that and not let me in them. But I didn't know that at the time. They just sounded cool.
Yes. Okay. So, and you just so this is your first girlfriend or one of many?
The first girlfriend in college. Yeah.
Okay. And tell us about this experience and what happened.
Yeah. So, I think it was right at the beginning of the second semester of college when she came into the dorm room and she said, I'm pregnant. And I will say that without having ever spoken about sex or pregnancy or anything with my family, like I knew what this meant, right? Like she's pregnant, that means there's a baby coming. And so I started working through, what does this mean? how is this going to affect my life, your life, our life? Because there's a baby coming. And as I'm working through that verbally, she stopped me and said, well, I'm not going to have the baby. I'm going to have an abortion. Mm. And to kind of set the stage for this is 1997. The internet existed as a place where people would go to download music very slowly. Like, that's it.
Right.
That was the extent of the internet in 1997. Like, email had just kind of become a thing. And so it wasn't, when I say it just become a thing, it wasn't like something that people were using broadly. The idea that, I don't even think I had a school email address in the freshman year. And so there wasn't social media, right? There wasn't people shouting their abortions. There wasn't this idea that people had abortions and all. Like, it was something that I knew what it was, but I didn't know anybody that had ever had one, and I didn't know that it was something that people did. Mm-hmm. And so, the best that I could do was to say, well, no, you're not going to have an abortion. We're going to have a baby. And, to do the best that I could to fight for that. And, at the end I lost. And I'll say, it wasn't like a passive fight, like whenever it was clear to me that I was not making any headway. As I mentioned earlier, anytime I ever got into a big jam, I would call my dad. And so I did. And he drove 9 hours to where I was at school. And the young lady's mom flew in, and, they met, and my dad offered to adopt the baby. We really did anything that we could think of to save the baby's life. Mm. And, and then we lost. And, after she had the abortion, she started struggling with her own classes. And so she went and saw a counselor, and she came and told me that, I met with this counselor, and she understood the situation, and she's going to help me waive my classes so that I don't fail out of school. And so I went the very next day. I spoke to the very same counselor. I told her the very same story. This is the person you met with yesterday. This is what you guys talked about. This is the resolution you came to. I'm also struggling with my classes. And she just looked at me and said, no, this doesn't impact you because you're a man. Mm-hmm. And so, so there I'm left with the mother of my child telling me that it didn't matter what I thought or what I felt or what I said, right? There's nothing that I could do. Really just stripping me of my masculine role to protect my child. And then the school counselor, who's a person of authority to a 19-year-old young man, telling me that this doesn't affect me. And so that's kind of what I was left with. And it did affect me. And I ended up failing out of college. I moved home. I failed out of a second college 2 more times. So I failed out of 2 colleges 3 times. And 8 years after the abortion, I was at the end of a 7-year methamphetamine addiction, homeless, unemployed, overdosing in a hotel room and waiting for the police to arrest me.
Okay, give me just a second here. If you're just tuning in, this is Ellen White with FaithWorks on Divine Mercy Radio. And today I'm speaking with Sean Corcoran of Men for Life about forming strong, faith-filled men and the importance of brotherhood and purpose in today's world. And we're grateful for our show's sponsor, Thales College, for supporting FaithWorks and helping us share these stories of faith and action. Oh my gosh, Sean, I've got so many questions here. Especially with what you said about this woman that, you're a 19-year-old kid and you're sharing this experience and she's saying, nah, yeah, you're fine. Just move on. And, coming home and then going through 2 other college experiences and failing out. It sounded like a spiral for you. And besides your dad, did anybody else know that you went through this experience? Other men?
No.
Nobody else.
No, who would I?
Right.
That's part of the issue. And when we get to the end, that's part of the work that I'm doing. Like what men would I have spoken to?
Right.
That there wasn't a place to find, even today. I mean, this is we're going back 29 years right now, but even today, there's an absence of men talking about abortion.
Yes.
There's a huge hole and we know that 1 in 5 men lose a child to abortion by the age of 45, right? But there's just not, men don't talk about it because men don't talk about it. And look, even if my dad didn't even know how to talk to me about it, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think we talked about it again after he left school until I went to treatment. And then I don't think we talked about it again for another 8 years probably. And so it just wasn't there wasn't anyone for me to go to talk about these things.
All right, so take us to the time where and what led you to this hotel room. What was going on, and how did you end up there?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I was homeless at the time. And we had just had a major hurricane here in 2005.
Wait, Sean, let me ask you this. What about your parents? Yeah. Where were they in all of this, and why were you homeless?
Yeah, so my parents did a lot, right? They helped me many times over that 7-year period. We never talked about drugs. I'm sure that they knew that something was going on. My mom said there was a huge prayer chain for years for me, but we just never talked about any of it. And, but I would come and go. Right. But the reality of someone who is a full-blown addict like that, my life was full of stealing, lying, manipulating, blaming. It was just complete chaos for everyone that was involved in my life. I destroyed every relationship that I had, and we got to a point about 6 weeks before I ended up in that hotel room where I'd stolen from my parents. And my dad finally said, I don't remember exactly what he said. What he said was, there's a bag of your stuff on the front porch, come get it and don't come back. But I know what he was really saying was, I have to set boundaries. I have to be able to protect myself, your mother, your siblings from all of the things that you're doing. And so we didn't talk. We didn't talk again for about 6 weeks. And so they did as much as they could, but the very best thing my dad ever could have done, the thing that saved my life, was the day that he set that boundary and said, don't come back. Because that was the last thread, right? The last thing that I was hanging on to was the safety of knowing that if I fell again, I could go back. And once that was gone, there was nowhere to turn but God. And so that next 6 weeks was not great. It was because then it added the compound to, I destroyed my family. And it just kept going down and down and down. And then we had a hurricane. And so I was working at a restaurant that was next door to the hotel. And so FEMA was paying for us to have hotel rooms. Many of their houses had been destroyed, the other employees. And FEMA was paying for us to have hotel rooms so that we could feed the first responders, like I say first responders, the construction workers who were rebuilding the city. And so that's how I ended up in the hotel room.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Okay. So
keep in mind, like we had a major hurricane here where everybody evacuated. I came home, before anyone else because the restaurant was going to open. And the first person I called was my drug dealer. And, and then the first thing I did, and this is what really set it off, was I went to my parents' house and I applied for a credit card in my dad's name and used that to get money to buy drugs. And so, when the credit card company called him, is when he was finally like, holy cow, like if we don't do something, this could destroy our lives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now you're in the hotel room and you've called your drug dealer, and what happens at this point and leads to you hitting rock bottom?
Yeah, so it was a couple of weeks later, and I actually stole from. I was the manager of the restaurant, and I stole from the till, and we had video poker machines. So the thought was, I would borrow money from the end of night receipts and then gamble it, but win, put the money back, and have money of my own to buy more drugs, right? Things that I had done dozens of times over that 7 years, never successfully. And, and it just went really, really south. And so, by the time I left the restaurant that morning, I knew that it was over. I knew I was going to be caught. And so they called me in when they got there, and they basically said, go back to the room and wait. The police are coming. The regional manager's coming to town. We're going to have the police come and arrest you. And, that was kind of the end of that. And so I went back to the hotel room, and I used the rest of the drugs that I had. And I just laid down on, a filthy hotel room carpet and just, ready to die, really.
I can't stop thinking about the prodigal son and, in the pig pen, and recognizing at that point, and, at the very bottom, my family has something so much greater for me, and I am choosing this. What happened to you? I mean, you obviously used a lot.
Yeah. So at that point, I always say that over that 7-year period, I prayed to God, to help me out one more time, right? So many times. Like, just help me out of this one more time, and I'll never do it again. Like, over and over and over. And every time, like, God would help me out. And then I would turn right back around to do it again. And so by the time you get to December 13th of 2005, I did not believe in that prayer anymore. I certainly didn't think God believed in that prayer. But as I was laying there, all that I could think of was how I destroyed the relationship with my family, and that now, on top of that, they were going to find me dead of an overdose in a hotel room. And how embarrassing for me to leave them with that. And so, I started praying differently. I started praying that God would help me out of this for them, so that I wouldn't embarrass my family one more time. And, and God listened, and I passed out, and I woke up the next morning. The police hadn't come. I woke up and my head was just really, really clear. And I knew exactly what I needed to do. And I walked down to the truck that I'd been living out of and just stuck my hand behind the driver's seat without even looking, and this is, I don't know how many of your listeners are familiar with addicts, but just take my word for it that there was nothing clean about the inside of this truck. Like, it was just like a bunch of trash, that was important to me because my brain was so fried. And so it was just full of stuff. And I just stuck my hand behind the driver's seat without even looking, and pulled out a treatment center pamphlet that had been shoved down there for 2 years, and went back to the room, and I called them, and they said that I could get in that day. And, and again, I called my dad. We hadn't talked in about 6 weeks, but I was told not to leave the room because I was going to be arrested, which is a big deal. So I wasn't really sure what I should do. And so I called him, and I told him, hey, I'm supposed to get arrested. This is what happened, but I can get into treatment. And, and he said, basically he said, call the regional manager, tell them where you're going. If they want to come and arrest you, they'll come and arrest you and go. And so that's what I did. And he met me and he filled up my gas tank. And I drove in a truck that had not had an oil change or maintenance for 5 years, through a national forest, just, no cell phone, just praying that I wouldn't break down in this forest. And then I made it to Shreveport, Louisiana, where the treatment center was. And I started hitting hills and my truck started shaking. And I was just praying, God, let me make it to the treatment center. And I made it into the parking lot of the treatment center and the truck broke down. And I had to push it into a parking spot. Oh my gosh. And so, at that moment, I knew that I was safe. It wasn't like, oh crap, my truck broke down, I can't leave. It was like, thank God my truck broke down and I can't leave. Like there's nowhere to go. There's no way to get there. I have no way to call anybody and no one would answer if I did. And so I am in the exact place that I need to be. Mm-hmm. And, and I went inside and I said, hey, I need to call my dad to let him know that I made it. And she said, well, your dad has already called and gotten all the information and they'll be here this weekend. Oh my gosh. And when you talk about the prodigal son, like that's that unconditional love, right? Like that's like just waiting for the return, and just like God is for all of us. That's what I got from my dad.
And not condemning at all. That's right. That's incredible. That is so incredible. And right. You're right. I mean, I really like what you said, Sean, about you don't have anything anywhere else that you can go because you've burned all those bridges. Your truck doesn't work and you have no place to go to. So you're stuck.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And so go ahead.
Now, I was just going to say with this treatment center, had you encountered this treatment center before or you just had this pamphlet or?
No, I just had a pamphlet, and it was free. So because what I would do when I was awake all the time by myself was gamble, I was able to get into this treatment center that was essentially for gambling, but everyone there had multiple addictions.
Yes. Yeah. It's just a symptom of the problem, isn't it?
Right. Mm-hmm. And so, thank God, because I couldn't have afforded to go anywhere. So it just happened to be what I was aware of, and that it was a place that didn't cost any money.
And it was helpful to you. How long were you there, Sean?
Yes, I was there for 45 days.
Oh, wow.
It was a 30-day program, and every 2 weeks they would have a family day for the four participants who had been there the longest. And so when my 30 days came up, I was like number 5. And so I just asked them if I could stay because I wanted to make sure. I didn't know what family day was. It's like a family day of counseling, not visitation. But I knew that whatever they offered, I wanted to get it. I didn't have anywhere to go. Like there was no reason for me to leave. Like if there was a potential for me to benefit more by staying 2 more weeks, then I was going to do it. So I stayed for 45 days. And
the couple minutes that we have left in this first part of our interview, Sean, I want you to talk about the abortion experience and whether or not that came up in your treatment or if it was after. And then we'll just talk a little bit about how you were introduced to Men for Life. And then in part 2, we'll really go into Men for Life.
Okay. Yeah. So yes, in treatment is where a counselor, as they're walking me through my life, to try to figure out how did I get there. And when I got to the abortion, she stopped me and she said, hey, I think we should really talk about this. And it's not something I would have stopped and talked about, but she had the foresight to recognize it because looking at it objectively, today I can say my life was on an upward trajectory. And then the abortion happened and it just crashed. Mm-hmm. But while I was in it, like I mentioned earlier, mm-hmm. it was not something that I was able to make the connection to. And so, that counselor helped me to begin to heal from the abortion. She actually did a lot of things that they do in abortion healing retreats. I named my child Michael. I wrote letters of forgiveness. I wrote letters asking for forgiveness. Just a lot of exercise. We really focused on it quite a bit. And that's where I was able to begin to heal from the abortion. And, I always say that the one thing she didn't tell me was that I wasn't the only man that had ever felt this way or dealt with this. And so in my mind at that time, like, okay, now I've done the exercises to deal with the abortion, and I feel so much better now that I'm given permission to grieve. I'm given permission to feel this. Like, it's okay that I didn't like this. And so now I can go get my life back, and so when I left treatment, that's what I did. I went back to college. I went to law school, and God every step of the way, because you don't get into law school after failing out of college 3 times. I would be willing to bet I had the lowest incoming GPA out of anyone who has ever gotten into law school, and I got into every law school I applied to.
Oh, that's
like it wasn't like here's the consolation prize.
Right. Well, and before you get too far ahead, Sean, this is an incredible part of your journey. I want to say too, and just mention, we've had Project Rachel is a local healing ministry here in the Diocese of Raleigh, and I've interviewed them several times and talked about the retreats that they do, and they're incredibly helpful for men and women. I think that there's this misunderstanding that it's only for women that are post-abortive, but it's also for men. And if you want some more information about that, look up Project Rachel in the Diocese of Raleigh. I don't have their website in front of me right now. I am going to actually be interviewing the new director after your interview. So it's coming up shortly. Cool. And then they have a June retreat. So very, very helpful ministry that individuals will just really feel God's grace and mercy and moving beyond their abortion experience and healing from abortion. It's quite impactful for the people that participate in that. So, okay, so we're moving from you having this experience, 45 days in treatment, and acknowledging the pain of your abortion experience, Sean, to what did you say? Trajectory, an upward trajectory, a very healthy experience, and moving beyond what you had prior. And you've applied to several law schools, and by the grace of God, been accepted to all of them, even with your GPAs from college. And then you went to law school. Tell us about your law school experience, and then let's kind of dive into Men for Life and how you encountered that organization.
Okay, law school was, I was not at the top of my class. I can acknowledge that without a problem. But I got out of it what I needed to get out of it. I did well, and I graduated, and I was the president of the student government, and had a lot of good friends and connections, and at that time in my life, still really, early in recovery, these are the things that were important for where I needed to be. I'm curious, Sean, because you mentioned this last time with friendships. You just had no desire. Yeah. You were not in a position to really be connected to other people. Yeah. Did you recognize how important it was to have friends at this point? Whether it was an act of recognition or whether I just felt compelled, okay. I don't know. But, okay. But it was important to me. Okay. Like that was the most important thing to me, because even when I finished out my last 2 years of college, all of the friends that I had my first time in college were gone, right? They were 8 years ahead of me in doing life. Several of them joined the military after 9/11, and so they were actually gone. But there wasn't, my last 2 years of law school, I would say, my last 2 years of undergrad were not filled with tons of friendships, just a couple of very close friends. And so when I got to law school, that was something that I knew was important to me. And, and I focused on that. And so then I as I'm graduating, I asked out Michelle. Now, I'd asked her out about 12 times over 7 years, and she had said yes 12 times, and she had canceled on me all 12 times, like every single time.
That's great.
And, and then when I was getting ready to go into my last year of law school, I was sitting with a friend, and I said, and I pointed her out, and I said, man, if she's in Lake Charles, because she was getting ready to graduate from dental school, and I said, if she's in Lake Charles, then I'm going to ask her out when I get there. And he said, well, if you wait till you graduate, she could be married. And what great advice, right? So yes. I didn't wait till I graduated.
Yes.
And so, we ended up getting married. And after I graduated, we got married, and then we started a family and had 2 biological kids and adopted 3 more. And in this process, I went on an Acts retreat. And so now we're 16 years after the abortion, and all these men sharing all these stories of the most vulnerable parts of their lives and being met with grace instead of judgment. God put it on my heart that I could unload everything for the first time. And I did. And it was very healing. But what was most important was that I had 3 different men come up to me afterwards privately and say, I've never told anyone this. It's been 20 years or it's been 30 years and I lost abortion. And just the recognition that me sharing my story gave them for the very first time in their lives, the ability to recognize that they were not alone because they thought they were the only man too that had felt like this. And so, so after that, I began sharing a little bit more. And that's how I first got connected with Men for Life.
Tune in next Saturday after the Divine Mercy Chaplet at 3 p.m. for part 2 of our interview with Sean Corcoran of Men for Life as our conversation continues.